uh, it's Bart and Elizabeth, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. All right. We are live. I'm live with Julio Nazario. So thank you for joining us, Julio.
Oh, thank you for having me, Bart. I really appreciate the opportunity.
You bet. And then my wife Elizabeth is joining as well.
Hi.
And primarily because we're going to be talking about Boriken. I got the pronunciation right?
Yes.
All right, which is the
Puerto Rico.
right, that's the
Puerto
native
Rico.
name for the island.
Yes,
So
it sure is.
all right, and Julio is going to walk us through because this is on GMT's P500. And as soon as I saw it, I got excited. Number one, I like these style of games, and I knew my wife, Liz, who I play a lot of games with, was going to be ecstatic.
Yay.
So she said she wanted to come on as well. But first, Julio, if you could tell us like where you're coming from and put us in time and space.
Yeah, for sure. My name is Julio Nazario. I'm originally from Ponce, Puerto Rico. I lived in Puerto Rico for the first 22 years of my life. And I studied engineering and came to the US and currently worked as an engineer for roads in the Forest Service in
Hmm.
North Carolina. And about 5 years ago, I got into board games because moving to a new place, meeting new people is not as easy, especially in the digital era that we live in. Notwithstanding the pandemic, but this is pre-pandemic.
Right.
And I got into board games and playing with people, and I really enjoyed the social aspect of them.
Mhm.
And then like a year later, I just kind of normally went into designing games. So I've been doing it for almost 5 years now, and it's been a blast. I've designed a lot of games, and I've got a couple published. One of them being Holy, the Festival of Colors. Holy is from Floodgate Games. Control from Pandasaurus Games. I got a game coming out from Stronghold Games called Dulce. And I've got a couple of others, including Boriken from GMT Games. And it's been a whole lot of fun to work on this game, and I'm glad that I was able to do it because the historical games genre of board games is something that's a little intimidating, to be
Mm.
honest. And this opportunity came up with the Zenobia Award last year, which was a great opportunity for people from underrepresented cultures to design games on those cultures. Because they had resources to do so. They had mentors assigned to each of the participants
Mm.
based on what game they were working on. And it was my son had just been born. I had little time to design games, so I only focused on the one, which was Boriken, and the research involved with that, because obviously with historical games, even though I'm from Puerto Rico, it was a lot to research because I just didn't know everything, and I still don't. I'm still learning. But that's just a quick introduction of how I came to be and how Boriken came to be.
Sure. And you're coming from New Jersey, right? Is that
North
what you said?
Carolina.
North Carolina. I'm sorry, you even said that. I don't know why I was thinking New Jersey.
And Julio, I have to say that when I started reading just a few things that Bart showed me, I was like reviving my desire to know more about my roots. And I love culture, and every opportunity that I have, I do stuff from Puerto Rico here and where I live in Wichita, Kansas. And I know when other Boricuas or Puerto Ricans are, see about this or know about this, they are going to be thrilled and wanting to know more about our roots.
Yeah, of course, and that was definitely one of my objectives with the game because in Puerto Rico, as a lot of us know, our roots are based in the, Spanish, Taino, and African, and a lot of the official history is based on Spanish recollection, and that's fine. But I think it's important to have a different perspective, especially from the Taino side of things, because a lot of the Taino culture has survived all the way up to today's Puerto Rico. Like the municipalities, a lot of them are based on Taino, the native names that they originally had. And a lot of people just know it, but it's not really something that's very studied very much. And that was my objective here, kind of giving players their perspective of the natives, and just go kind of through the experience of the game, giving them the experience of what they went through, pre and 1493, during the Spanish arrival, and then afterwards, which is a interesting mechanism and perspective on the game currently.
Yeah, that was one thing that was really exciting even for me, because there's kind of like three different styles of the game. And then you can even play it as almost like a campaign where, based on the very first phase, is the setting or game setup for the second phase when the Spanish arrive. Do you mind? I know you might even share some things with us with a share screen, but you can talk us through it, or do you mind explaining some of the game like mechanics a little bit?
Yeah, of course. Let me just share it right here. You can just add it to the
Yep.
stream. So this is a quick overview of Boriken, and as you said, in the GMT P500, the game is essentially one common map and common mechanisms for the whole structure of the game. However, there's three different games inside this game, right? Um, and like I said earlier, one of them is represented in the before the arrival of the Spanish. So it's actually a competitive game in which all of us are Taino caciques, which are the chiefs of the villages, and we are trying to settle and discover the island. So this one is really about teaching what the island currently has, and I even have like tokens that involve the endemic flora and fauna of Puerto Rico. Just those little tidbits that, they're kind of mechanical, but at the same time they do teach something endemic about the island while you do that. And of course, it's competitive, right? So it's you're all natives, and the Taino culture, it was developed through hundreds of years of many natives coming to the island. So each one of us represents a different culture that is settling on the island, and ultimately one is going to win based on how much whoever settled the most and discovered the most in the island. So it's a very competitive, but at the same time educational in a sense. And of course, this is all pre 1493. The second one is essentially when the Spanish arrive, and this turns this type of game cooperative. So we're all still the Tainos, and we're kind of we have this new character on the scene that we don't know what their objectives are and what is really going on, but they're definitely coming into the island and they're settling the island, even though the Taino are already there. um and essentially the game is the second one, you're trying to complete objectives throughout the island based on historical elements that happen throughout those times, and you're trying to do it before you lose control of the island, because as we all know, the Spanish ultimately ended up with control of the island of Puerto Rico, right? We know that's going to happen, but we want to make sure that as gamers, we want to complete these objectives before that happens. So there's many objectives that you're trying to go through, and there's only one way to lose, which is lose control of the island. Now, the third game essentially is also cooperative, but it's a survival game. At this point, you've lost control of the whole island, and what you're trying to do is, historically, what happened is the first the first cooperative game, which is for 1493 to 1511, there was it ended up being a lot of conflict between the Spanish and the Taino. Even there being a certain war and rebellion of the Taino people. And that ultimately ended up being a loss for the Taino. And by the time we arrive at 1520, there were less than 500 Taino in the island, where when they arrived, historically, there were about 50,000. And of course, there was a lot of things that involved with that, mainly disease, right? Because it wasn't, the Spanish didn't mean to bring disease into this new world, but that was one of the main things that wiped the native culture out. So what you're trying to do in this one is that in the survival one, you're trying to open up gates, right, on these sections of the island to be able to escape the
Hmm.
island and try to survive your culture through that. And that's kind of what happened. There was an exit of the Taino that didn't want to be part of the Spanish culture, that did not want to be part of the encomienda system. And ultimately that's kind of the whole objective of that game. So there's many ways to lose and only one way to win, where the other cooperative game, there's many ways to win but only one way to lose.
Hmm.
So of course I just went through a summary of what the game really involves, but let me just go a little more in depth of what the whole mechanism and interaction in the game is. So
Sure.
this right here is what I call the cacique board, and each player is going to have a different cacique, again, which are the village chiefs, and those are they can be both men and women, and they have a little power involving who they are, right? And you just assign it here on your side, and the cacique were both the political, military, and religious leaders of their village. So this is essentially the action track that you're going to be taking on your turn. You take this piece and you assign it to one of these, and wherever you assign it, that's going to be the three actions that you're going to be doing on your turn.
Hmm.
And there's many actions that you can do between, of course, moving, that involve just moving along the island, or even canoeing using the water outside the island to move faster. But there's also stuff like building settlements, which are these right here. And of course, in the cooperative game, you use these, which everybody has the same color, but they're double sided. So on this side, for the competitive game, you use this side. So it
Hmm.
uses a lot of double use components in a way, where because we're allowed to do 3 games, but with only one set of components for one game, right? Um, so one of the main resources in this game, because while it is a historical game, it has a lot of historical elements. It has a lot of Euro elements as well. So we have both the Taino as a resource, right? Because those are the people that you're trying to protect and save, but they're also wanting to achieve your objectives as well. And we have the cassava, which is the main, I guess, the main food in the island, which was kind of like a root vegetable. We call them like yuca nowadays.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And then we also have the gold. Of course, that's one of the big ones. And we have a little gold bag that has a little element, push your luck element on that one. But those are the 3 elements that you're going to be using in the game. And of course, as a cacique, you're doing one of these 3 tracks, and they have attached action tracks to them, right? So in this track, you can only do these 3 actions, but your your Taino cards allow you to do more actions if they match the type of action that you're taking. So
Hmm.
you can see a Taino card has 3 pieces of information. It has a color represented one of the 5 regions of the island. So you have the south, the west, the north, the east, and the central part of the island. So this one represents the central part of the island, but this is a religious Taino, right? So these would be what we call today the Nitainos, kind of the lieutenants of the cacique. And you can use your resources to assign them permanently to your actions and add extra actions on your turn. So essentially making a little engine that you can do better actions. But of course, you want to make sure to diversify, because if I use this religious action this turn, I cannot use it in a future turn. I have to use one of the other 2.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Now, historically, a lot of the elements are ingrained into the mechanisms of the game. So you can see here that the enemy deck, which is essentially you flip and it shows you a region that you just add an enemy. But the other side of the enemy deck, again, double use components, has a positive and a negative. So on this one, essentially says religious. So if you use the religious track, you're going to get a positive this turn. But if you use the military track, you're going to have a negative. So in this case, if you use the military, you cannot use the canoe action this on the military track. So little things like that, but they essentially represent things that historically happened in the in Boriken, right? So of course there's also things like roads, right? The Spanish brought roads to the island, and is something that's orally positive when it came to moving around the island. But of course there's the greed part, right? When it came to the gold. And that's one thing that's also interesting in this game is this track right here. So this track is actually different on the 3 different games. This one is essentially for the 3rd game, but the second one is one of the most interesting ones because that one has to do with the gold. So the gold is obviously one of the main objectives of the Spanish here in Puerto Rico, of course, besides bringing Catholicism to the natives. But in this one, it's interesting because you're using it to remove them from the island. So that's one of the ways you can remove them. Of course, you can attack them, and there's a whole system for that. But the more gold you give them, you're going to remove them, but the more that they're going to come later on. So you use them to remove them. It's easier to remove them through gold, but then there's less gold to go around, and there's more conquistadors that are going to be coming to the island. So that is just I went through a lot of things, and obviously there's a lot of other elements. Do you have any other questions on anything I just talked about?
No, that was a great summary. Any questions from you, Liz? Anything?
I think when I'm a learner when I play.
Yeah.
I mean, it is good what you're explaining, but I have to be a hands-on learner.
And that was one question you had, and I noticed on the P500 page it lists a lower complexity. And I know there's a question came in on playtime, and I think it mentions, is it 1 to 2 hours, or is it 45 minutes to an hour and a half? I can't remember.
45 minutes to an hour and a half on each separate game, right?
Right.
So like you said earlier, the games could be played individually, each one, but they could also be played in a campaign. So if you play from the start, whatever happened at the end of the first game influences the second game, and the second game influences the third. Now, when it comes to complexity, you are right. It's definitely on the lower complexity scale. As a designer, I always like to go with language-independent designs. So you can see that even though there's obviously text and all of that, and even on the historical element, there's text, but a lot of the historical elements are incorporated into the mechanisms of the game. So you are essentially mainly just reading the rules to learn the game, and everything else is through symbology and the interaction between players, of course. So there at this point, the game is currently at 10 ages and plus for complexity's sake. And that's, again, going back to the whole education component of it. Because I want to make sure to have a wider audience. We want to make sure to teach a wider audience.
Right. And I love the fact that it's broken into the 3 different games. So each one can kind of be learned and inspected and then played. And then after fully grokked or understood, move on to the next one, and then eventually putting them all together.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously the first game has the one with the least mechanisms. It's kind of like the learning game, because you're using just the mechanisms against each other, and then you introduce the element of the conquistadors and the element of the enemy positive and negative tracks, and of course the track on the top that I talked about changes as well. So there are elements and mechanisms introduced as the game go on, and some that change.
Let me cover. There were some questions that came in, and I told the folks we would come to them after you're done with the explanation, and put in more questions now. It may bounce my question board around, but that's fine. Let's see. We've got Vorpal in, but he was talking about how he's been busy. Vorpal does say, hello, esposa.
Hola,
or
wife.
So and then, of course, Vorpal loves to mock me directly, so he wants to know what the thing is on my face. I used to have no facial hair. Now I'm going all kind of Western cowboy. So you got to take Vorpal with a grain of salt. I poke back at Vorpal.
Well, this is the first time I've seen you personally, and it looks good. So I don't have a point. I don't have a point of reference.
Thank you. She likes it, so that saves.
That's all that matters. Then
that is right. That is right. Let's see. So Vorpal, he asked, does your game have miniature figures?
It does not. It does not. So the game is published through GMT and their P500 system. And for those of you that don't know what that is, essentially GMT does their own manufacturing on their games,
Mhm.
and they do really well. That at this point they've published over 400 games.
Yes.
And the way the P500 works is essentially a pre-order system in which they put in just the prototype art and the base premise of the game, like they did, and you'll probably share the link.
Mhm.
And people pre-order based on that. And the pre-ordering system, essentially, they don't charge you anything until the game is going to be produced, because once it reaches those 500 units pre-ordered, that's when the game is set to be developed and produced and manufactured. So
Mhm.
once it reaches those 500 units, they're gonna be completing the development, doing the art, and the art is something very interesting because they are gonna be hiring people that are very knowledgeable of the Taino culture and using artists from that community in Puerto Rico. So I'm really excited about that. Now going back to your original question with figures, the GMT, since they do their own manufacturing, they are limited on the types of components that they can use. Of course, that is something that maybe an upgrade pack later on if the game is successful, and that's what we're trying to do here, right? Kind of, shout out and show people what the game represents, and the more people that buy into it and pre-order it, the better success that GMT is going to see on it, and the more support they're gonna give it as well. So if it reaches 500, that's great, but if it reaches 750, 1,000, that's even better.
You bet.
Yes. I
And
can't wait to see a Taino meeple.
well,
I
yeah,
will love it.
it might just be a little square piece of wood or a block. Now I know Vorpal. So Vorpal's quick follow-up comment was, "Kids seem to demand figures these days." I think Vorpal isn't as much into the plastic figures, so I think he likes your answer, Julio.
Yeah, and I completely understand that, especially on the Kickstarter audience, right? Which is very different from what you do on a P500.
Right.
But hey, personally, I don't know if you see it on the video, but I have a 3D printer, and that's definitely
Ah,
something I do. And of course, if maybe there's I can, if the game is successful, I can get some uh, miniatures that you can print yourself and that kind of thing. That's a good
very
alternative,
cool.
right?
I like that too. Yeah, that everything's becoming more customizable, especially with like 3D printers. I've got a buddy that's making his own like box inserts so he can organize things and stuff with
Yeah.
his 3D printer.
Yeah.
So now Steven Reynolds says, I was looking at this on GMT 500 and I will back it now. So you've got just with that.
Thank you, Steven. I really appreciate it. Currently, I think we're the 200 mark, right? So we're 40% there, and it's only
Yeah.
been, I think, 2 weeks. And GMT, the GMT P500s, they go for a couple months, or sometimes even a year and beyond. But
Yeah.
so it's not like Kickstarter that there's a limit, right? There's 30-day limit to get funded. No, nothing like that. But again, the faster it gets there, the more support GMT will see on it, and the more success that the game can have. Of course, once people play it, that's the real going through the motions, right, and seeing how good the game is. And I'm behind it as a designer, of course, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was like Sekigahara. It took like 4 or 5 years to get backed. And I had a buddy that had backed it earlier and was just like, come on, come on, come on. It finally came out and it blew up and everybody was loving it. Now it's getting reprint after reprint. So
Yeah. So I think it'll definitely get there, especially there's a big Puerto Rican community, of course, in the island that sees some good benefit, especially on the education side of things. And that's what I originally wanted, and not just for the island, but worldwide, right? That's what
mhm.
GMT has. They have a good reach on a worldwide audience, and I think a lot
And
of
for
people can.
Yeah.
as a parent, because we had the hurricane and there's so many people living the island, to keep that kind of roots in a game, it is, I think, is an awesome idea.
Yeah, and that was always kind of, as a designer, I always designed simple games, or under an hours. But when this opportunity for the Zenobia Award came up, I thought that this was it. This is where I can do it, and I set myself up to do it. And doing the research was so much, but it was so worth it, and I'm very proud of what came out of it.
Very good. Now, Vorpal has a question. I actually knew this, but I'll let you answer because I'd asked Elizabeth the same thing. And this is part of that educational part. So Vorpal talks about, so natives, is this potential like any headhunters or cannibals? Now, I know this because I literally asked the same question, but I'll let you answer this.
So that's interesting because after the game has was announced on GMT, I have had conversations with people from the Taino Council in Puerto Rico. So there are people that currently still follow the Taino culture, which is something that I did not know much about. But at this point, of course, with the game coming out, and then they're looking to do the cultural consultant once the game gets on the 500 stage. They talked to me about I had a lot of questions, and that was one of them. And one of the misconceptions with the Taino, especially the Caribe, which is the Caribe were kind of the opposition and also a different culture of natives in the Caribbean. um, People think that they were cannibals, but from what the Taino Council mentioned to me was that what they did was that they, it's a little gruesome, but what they did was that they cut the limbs of their enemies and they displayed them in their house as trophies. So they didn't really eat them, but what they did, of course, is just kind of a trophy system, the way a lot of people see with hunters on animals and stuff like that. And of course, since their way they told their stories was all through song and through the, word of mouth, right? They would bring these trophies and talk about their beating this enemy and stuff like that, which I thought was interesting.
And there was I think you referenced, I can't remember the name, but a much more like violent tribe that would boat in and attack and raid, right?
Yeah, the Caribe. And that's in the first game, while it is competitive and players are settling the island, it is not all pacific, right? Because you are fighting against yourself, but there's also an enemy, which is the Caribe in this case.
Excellent. Huh.
Yeah, and when the conquistadors are introduced, the Caribe are replaced, are for the conquistadors as the enemies.
Got it. All right. And then Vorpal says he loves survival games. So that's a real neat aspect. You've actually got these different styles that are laid in throughout the three different versions.
Yeah. Again, we got a competitive area control game on the first one, and then we have a cooperative area control game of completing objectives, and the objectives is a deck of cards. So we have around 20 objectives that are all historical based, and you just draw about 5 of them and try to complete them before you lose control of the island. And then the last one is the survival game, which is kind of trying to save your resources at the right time and opening the gates by defeating Tainos, the conquistadors, and being able to escape and using your Taino to do that. Now, one interesting thing, as I said before, this is all from the perspective of the Taino, and of course, they had their own gods in their culture. So, as Taino, in the game also introduces the Taino gods as cards that you can use and even boost the way you do your actions. Because of course, the game is historical, but from their point of view and their history, these are gods that they believed in. And they're of course going to be part of the game as well.
Stephen Reynolds has a question. Is the solo game basically the cooperative game?
Yes. So as of now, both cooperative games, the survival and the objective based goals, are both solo, because all the systems in the game are run by the enemy deck. So the number of players doesn't really affect that. I would say maybe a higher player count does make it a little easier because people are a little more spread out across the island and they can do things without moving as much. But there's definitely, since the development is not completed until we do the P500, I'm definitely been considering ways of making the competitive one a solo variant as well, which would involve maybe a deck of cards or something along those lines. But it's not out of the question. But as of now, yeah, the cooperative games are the ones with the solos.
Got it. And then Vorpal wants to know how many players.
It's 2 to 4 players, and again, 1 player on the cooperative ones. But yeah, again, I originally had it up to 5, but when you're doing these actions that involve these engine building systems, sometimes a turn can be a little longer that you want to expect. And with a 5-player game, I think it felt a little too long to get back to your turn. And it wasn't too much, of course, but we definitely want to make sure that even though you can play 5 players, it's not the best way to play it. So I don't want to put a player count that is just not a good way to play the game.
Got it. Kabuki Kid always coming into the lives, just says, "Hey Chief, hey Julio, and hey Liz or Elizabeth." All right,
Hello.
let's see. And then Mike just puts out GMT with the question, actually prints in China. Yes, they do. Just their printing ability in China and their pricing is why almost everybody prints in China. I do know there's some German printers, and I know there's other printers around the world. Let's see. A bunch of people saying hi to Kabuki Kid. Oh, here we go. Steve wanted to know again, what was the name of your game at Stronghold again?
So it's called Dulce. It's currently not even on BGG. I've definitely it's been announced. They haven't had a VGG page, but it should be available later this year. It's a I would say I mean, I'm not here to talk about it, but it's
Sure.
you're making sweets. It's a bingo style game. Everybody has a deck of cards. You call out the number and you try to plant the different beans and try to make sweets from those beans. So it's an interesting one for sure.
Cool. Kabuki loves the P500 system. I do as well. You know, that GMT was way forward thinking on that with, hey, we don't know exactly what the folks want. We've got an idea of what we like, and that's how the old system was. Make what you like, and hopefully the people like it. But I love the P500 because some games just, you know, Chariot is out. I think that's the full name. But it's risen so fast that it moved up on the production style. So, and that idea of what do the customers want? Well, we can see what they're willing to pay for on the P500.
Yeah, for sure. And again, that's why, you know, making it to the 500 is great because the game will be published, but the higher it goes, the it can get pushed on the front of the production line for sure.
You bet. Stuka Joe, he'll like this. Of course, he lives in San Juan, so I haven't met him personally yet. Have you ever met? I'm forgetting it's Jose, but I can't remember Jose's last name.
I have not. On the board game industry side, I know definitely a couple of people, but there's definitely a lot of people for me left to meet. Again, I think it's a very live culture, us Puerto Ricans, and it's always good to meet new people, especially in the board game industry.
He does. He spends a lot of time and has beautiful camera angles and stuff. And so Steven's saying, have Stuka Joe do a preliminary playthrough. So I'm sure Stuka will see this. I think he'll love it, of course. So
yeah. Again, the game is still in development, but we can definitely play a full game. I don't see why not. And of course, that is something that once it reaches the P500, they'll have play tests and, of course, development. So that's what's going to make the game better. And I'm all up for doing something like that even before the P500 hits, because I believe the game as it currently is now.
Perfect. Let's see. More people agreeing with Stuka coming in. Yeah, he's great. He's retired. He was I think a U.S. assistant attorney. And we've talked several times, and great guy. Let's see here. He's doing he's on the P500. It's about to come out. He came up with a solo system for a lot of the CDGs of multiple different games, and he featured it on his show. And then GMT was like, we love this. We want to make a printed version of this. He was like, I don't know if anybody will like it. And immediately it's like 2,100 people, backed it on the P500. So
wow, that's awesome.
let's see, Mike McKenna, any related interest in the Spanish-American War that's underrepresented in war games?
For me, not really. Again, this is definitely a genre of the board game design industry that I'm not very experienced in. And for me, I think it could be another one that for sure it is interesting, especially because, of course, at the end of that, that's when Puerto Rico went from being a Spanish colony to a U.S. colony, right? And it is, I've never really thought about it, but it could be something that I could definitely be interested in working in for sure.
Now look at this. Stuka Joe is in, and first of all, he lets me know, hey, I haven't retired yet. Sorry, Jose. I aged you out. He says, Chief, you have a right to remain silent. Just kidding. Love to take a look at the game. So he's not retired. I thought you were close. Jose. My bad. But
he caught you. He caught you talking about him.
So. Yeah, he did. He was like, what is it? Like his ears were ringing. He's like, whoa, Chief saying some incorrect stuff. Hello. Sorry, they call me Chief, his nickname coming in. So he is in. I missed a question here that came in because Steven said, he said, and here is Stuka Joe. So he saw him coming in. Vorpal would love if you included, or GMT included, a history pamphlet also in the game, just covering some more information about Puerto Rico.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea, and definitely a lot of those historical tie-ins between the games is definitely going to be something that's outside the game that's going to be more, like you said, more like a story of what happened between now and then and the historical characters involved in it.
Oh, excellent. Anything else? I know we were going through all the questions. I didn't want to cut you off.
No, I think one of the pieces of education, if you know about Puerto Ricans, the genetic composition is 72% Spaniard, 13% Taino, and 15% African. And then with the 72 Spaniard, it is more than Spain there. It's whoever was, in that area.
Yeah, it's more European, right? And of course, in the 1800s, there was a mass introduction of different people from different European countries in the in the island as well. But what you mean is more like what our Puerto Ricans are usually composed of.
If you say Puerto Rican, right? That's how our composition genetically.
Right. Yeah, we both did 23andMe. Mine is all, my little color wheel of where I'm from is blue, which is like German French. It's like just blue. Hers looks like, there's yellow. Yeah, Taínos in there.
Everywhere.
North Africa, Spain. I was like, wow, my little wheel's born.
I know. And I thought it was a higher percentage of Taino, but I'm 56 European.
Yes, yeah. 22% North African, I think.
Yeah, and the rest Taino. Yeah. But in school, I always do the play of the Taino Indian, and so I thought it was Taino, more Taino. But I have the Taino. Everybody has some. So.
Yeah, especially this is something like on Puerto Ricans, how we call it the la mancha de plátano, the plantain. Because a lot of people sometimes have this birthmarks in their bodies that look like just a blob, and that's something that's related to the Taino that we always kind of talk about. Even my niece has one and stuff like that, so it's always interesting to know about the culture and the ascendancy of people in our culture, especially.
You bet. So Vorpal says he would need or love that historical pamphlet in order to bond with the game, and also that good artwork that you'd mentioned as well.
Yeah. Again, both on the artwork side and the cultural consulting, there's going to be people from the Taino Council in Puerto Rico involved in that, and I'm really excited about that.
That is good. Let's see. And then Kabuki Kid says she is a mix of everything as well: Italian, Swiss, Native American, Irish, etc. Laugh out loud. So, and then I know I even read an article once where Puerto Ricans are considered some of the most genetically diverse grouping of peoples in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and not even.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was reading that they're doing like the perfect genetic composition, and they said that one of the
It's not Germanic. What are you talking about?
no,
Just
and
kidding. Just
and it
kidding.
came from one of the chiefs in Loiza, and through that women is how they kept the Taino genetic, because the Taino were eliminated.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and that's a good point too. Liz has told me for years that one of the really interesting things with the Tainos is that there were male and female chiefs that were very well
Yes.
known, and that's represented in your game as well.
And it was a big kind of like shock of culture, because Spaniards, the males are the one,
Well, machismo.
the machismo, and we have women
Yeah,
living
yeah.
on
I
the
mean,
island.
almost every place in Europe, right? That's kind of the case. But even in when you were talking about the oh, I lost my train of thought.
The female chiefs.
Yeah, but
Oh.
when no worries, no worries. It'll come back, or maybe it won't.
But I think it's a lot of battles on different levels.
Hmm.
It's not just wanting this piece of island. It's just like more the how the society was functioning. That
Yeah,
was
and it did come back. It did come back.
there you
So
go.
when it comes to the cultural and ancestry hodgepodge that us Puerto Ricans are, also in the island. Me working for the Forest Service is something that kind of giving a little interesting tidbit here. Um, the national forest in Puerto Rico is called El Yunque National Forest. It has more biodiversity in 40,000 acres that forest is. That's fairly small than all the national forests in the U.S. combined.
Hmm.
When it comes to amphibians and insects and birds, it's just filled with different biodiversity, and that's something that's it leaves a lot to say, because there's a lot of endemic fauna and flora there that should be learned about as well.
Maybe that's another board game.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, that's even, you must have read Vorpal's deal, because he even says, and we can do this here, of course. Tell us about your next upcoming projects. And I know this one's maybe capturing you a little bit, but it sounds like your designs, you have to let them out of your head, is what it sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, I've been working on board game design for 5 years, and I've designed, at least to prototype stage, over 70 games. So I'm very a person that I like to design a lot. And obviously, Boriken is one that I'm really excited about this year with the P500, and I already mentioned Dulce from Stronghold Games coming out later this year. I also have a Kickstarter for a game called Peanut Butter Belly Time. And it's a game that I designed for a peanut butter company called Nerdy Nuts. And that's a drafting game that you're picking ingredients to make peanut butter jars. So, again, going back to the games that I usually go with, simple language independent games. And I also have a game that's coming out. Well, it will be on Kickstarter from Academy Games. And what I can say there is that it's a game that has to do with DNA splicing.
Really? You're working with Uva?
Yes, I sure am.
Wow.
So I have that, and then I have some other ones that are still fairly early to talk about next year. But yeah, I've got a couple irons in the fire for sure.
Very cool. Yeah, especially with Academy Games, Uva and Gunther just coming off of their it's their sci-fi game that was like
Stellaris.
Yeah, Stellaris. How many millions? I can't remember, $3 or $4 million in backing, or maybe I'm off with that too. Stuka will let me know if I'm wrong.
I think it was 2.5 or something like
2.5.
that. Yeah.
Okay. I threw in an extra million.
Yeah, so it's been really excited to see the development on the backside of that one. And a lot of my designs, if you never played Holy or Control, are very physical in visually, but also the physicality of games is introduced into the mechanism of play as well. I like to do that. Again, being an engineer, kind of that's how my brain works, I guess. But yeah, that's kind of a couple things that hopefully your audience see. Okay, at least this guy's designed some games, so maybe I know what I'm doing, right?
Sure.
So Boriken will reflect that as well.
I love it. Now, I know I went to some more questions. Did you have anything else that had kind of piqued your interest from your standpoint?
I just want to play it.
Oh, yeah.
And get it, what's going on there, and just it's like a review of what they taught us in the history class, and all the things that I don't know, but it sounds so interesting.
Yeah, we can make that happen again. I think I this year I've got baby number 2 on the way, so
Ooh,
there's that. So I know
congratulations.
my time will be a little limited, but I think PAX Unplugged is one that I think I'm going to. So and that's at the end of the year, so maybe we can make something happen there.
Cool.
It was interesting. Somebody says the Chinos should kind of like get help for the I'm getting here.
That's all right.
The pirates. The
Oh,
pirates.
yeah. Well, I think Vorpal said pirates make everything better, so you could add in pirates, but then we get into like the fictional historical side of taking down the conquistadors.
Yeah, we're talking about 1500, right? So it's a little early for Pirates in the Caribbean, but yeah,
could
maybe.
happen later on,
Right.
Yeah.
Now Gilbert here says, and I'll mispronounce. Is it
Nieves
Nieves
Colon.
Colon is herself Puerto Rican, but works at the University of Minnesota.
And he said something about her, about the genetics.
Got it. Is that it's
up
further
top.
up? I missed it.
It's
Here we go. So the molecular anthropologist, as Maria, has demonstrated with ancient DNA that there is a considerable genetic continuity between pre-Hispanic occupants and living inhabitants of Puerto Rico. Very cool.
Yeah,
that's a good one. I didn't want to miss that.
Yes.
Geography of Puerto Rico is about approximately 100 by 35 miles. So if you really think about it, it's fairly small. And of course, before the big hurricane hit, a lot of people were leaving the island, but we had about 4 million people in that area. And even on the mountains, even though it's 100 by 35 miles, elevation wise, it goes up to 4,300 feet. So again, there's a lot of area there and a lot of people as well. So.
And I loved Ponce when we visited. I was like, you could feel all that. Is it the second Spanish city that was, or the first? I can't remember.
Well, the first was San Juan, right? But yeah, Ponce, of course, is named for Juan Ponce de Leon, which was the first official governor of the island.
Because I love the old. It had that real Spanish feel with the Spanish, the
architecture.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. It. And that's something that they're definitely working to I guess rebuild, because after the hurricane came, there also were a lot of earthquakes on the island, and it's just being hit with cold, hurricanes and earthquakes. It's just been really hard, especially I still have family. My parents live there, my in-laws live there, and it's a lot to deal with for sure. And I obviously can help in any way I can.
It was very sad when the continuous earthquake were coming, and you will see the pieces of those old buildings falling and falling. It's like, oh, we cannot replace that. I mean, we can renew it, remodel, but
yeah. Now, Stuka Joe also says he would love to get a hold of a prototype of Boriken as well.
Well, we gotta get together and talk about it then, because it's anything that can show the people out there what the game is about. I'm all up for it.
Beautiful. A couple last ones. So Kabuki Kid would love to visit. Her grandfather had a friend that lived there, raved about Puerto Rico. So very cool.
It's not really that difficult because Puerto Rico is part of the U.S., so you don't need a passport or anything special. It's just a plane ride away. And of course, as anywhere you're going, you can stay at a hotel, Airbnb, and it's not. And a lot of the people in Puerto Rico, the main language is Spanish, but especially on the younger community, English has just been a second language that almost everybody has learned at this point.
And then Mike McKenna asks, is there still a Puerto Rican independence movement?
Yeah,
I've
there
always been.
definitely is. Yeah, there always been. I think there will always be, because even if you think about it, right now Puerto Rico, even though essentially we're part of the U.S., but we're not a state. And this is what we call the Estado Libre Asociado de Puerto Rico,
The
which is
Commonwealth.
essentially, yeah, the
Mhm.
Commonwealth, right? So this is essentially, we are part of the U.S., we belong to the U.S., but we also have some independence in our culture, like things like the Olympics. You never think about it, but Puerto Rico has their own Olympic athletes and teams that compete there outside of the U.S.
And
Right.
Miss Universe.
Oh yeah, you got to follow that.
Yeah.
Very cool. Oh, very cool. Well, thank you, Julio, for coming on. Now let's do this before we leave. I know we touched on it a little bit, but again, go over some of your other designs that are already in production, or what you can talk about, because we definitely like pointing to other games that you have as well.
Yeah, of course. My first game, it was Holy Festival of Colors from Floodgate Games, and that's, you see it over here.
Mm.
And that is a game based on the Indian Color Festival. And Floodgate Games did a fantastic job on the cultural consulting on that. But it's essentially a 3-leveled game, area control, that you're spreading color, and they follow through the levels. So it has this puzzle element that's, again, verticality on that. And then control, again, I missed there. Control is from Hanasaurus game, and this is a 3D area control game in which you use kind of like Lego pieces around a cube. So the board is a cube, and you're trying to overlay over everybody else in just a quick gameplay of, you're just doing a line, but since it's 3D, it wraps around other people's cubes, and ultimately you score based on the perspective of that cube. And then this is actually Dulce over here. And that's the one that's going to be coming out from Stronghold Games later this year.
Perfect. Very good.
I want Dulce too.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, I
Oh,
want to buy
all
it.
right. We'll buy it. We will
Yeah,
get it.
it's funny, that was the original name that I had for it, and this is the first time that somebody's kept the original name, because Dulce is, obviously, because that's what we call sweets in
Yeah.
Puerto Rico. So I'm glad it kept that one.
Yes.
Good. So Kabuki Kid didn't know that Puerto Rico could become the 51st state. How far out would that be? Who knows? It could happen. It would be really the last territory that could become a state, but I don't know if it'll ever happen. So,
Yeah,
because there's a
yeah.
lot of tax breaks to be in a territory as well.
Yeah,
It is
yeah, and
difficult.
ultimately it's not our, as Puerto Ricans, I don't think it's our decision, right? Because it's a U.S. Decision, and I think one thing for sure is that Puerto Ricans, when it comes to like the world wars, right, World War II and the Vietnam War, and we were all involved in that as part of
Mhm.
the U.S. My dad is a veteran. And I have my brother-in-law is in the military, and those kind of things are obviously very important, because you're risking your life for your country, and this is not just Puerto Rico but the U.S. as well. So it is something that I've always respected, and of course, a lot of people like their cultural identity, and everything that Puerto Rico has to offer as well is very unique as compared to the rest of the U.S. So it can go either way, but I don't see it happening anytime soon. Definitely, it needs to be a shift in thinking with that.
Yes.
And you have it was an uncle. What's the name?
He was a Borinkenier.
Oh, yes. So
He
very
has
cool.
Borinkeneer.
his medallion and all those stuff.
Oh wow!
He just passed away.
Oh, I didn't know about that. That's great. Again, it's Puerto Rican people are definitely we adapt. Like, Liz and myself, we live in the U.S. and but we still love our roots and where we come from, and we
Yes.
always look forward to going back and to our Isla del Encanto.
Yeah, no, this is true. She has a personalized tag, which I
Yeah.
won't say, but it's definitely a Puerto Rican nickname. Well, I'll go borrow her car, and people are honking and yelling at me, Boricua, and I'm like, ah. I'm actually German, but I know it's confusing. So
That's
I've
awesome.
had people run up to me, and my Spanish is not as good as it should be, and I'm like, oh, esposo, the husband. So yes, there's definitely a draw. There was a couple questions here. Sorry, she's looking at me like, "Are you crazy?" Yeah, a little bit crazy. Joe says he just checked out GMT. Your game looks like it popped on me. Your game looks like a winner. His wife is from
Buenos
Buenos
dias.
dias.
Buenos Dias, and there's still no way she'll sit down and play a game with me. Maybe. Although I do
Maybe.
know some games just aren't for folks. I mean, just gaming in general. But you never know with the cultural tie-in. Hello.
And again, the game is meant to be on the more simple side, and a lot of the historical elements, especially when you think a historical game, is like super hard to learn and play, and they take hours. Obviously
Right.
that's not the case for all of them, but this is definitely one that's more on the Euro side, and the historical elements are incorporated into the mechanical.
Love it.
Mhm.
Love it. Mike, if I'm wrong, my apologies. When I was in the Army, we had a guy from Guam. He just told me that Guam could never become a state because it was not a territory. So if I'm wrong, that's possible. I was 22, and I could have been stunned by boot camp just in general. So my apologies if I'm wrong on that. Let's see. I think we're good. If any questions before we leave, any questions on the game? Obviously, I'll put a link in the description. I'll go in afterward. But if you're interested at all, it really takes the folks that are interested to go to GMT, go to their P500. You can look at Boriken, and you can back it. It's like a pre-order kind of thing. I've already done so. And I know Liz was going to put it out on social media as well, because there's a Puerto Rican coalition.
Oh, Puerto Ricans needs to back up this game.
Yes, awesome. Yeah, if you want to show, I currently still have the game. If you want to, so people can see what kind of looks like, and the there you go. So this is the board of Boriken. Of course, this is current day Puerto Rico, but obviously all the locations are based on their original Taino names. It's divided into 5 regions, and of course the Tainos are also one thing that's very interesting here. That illustration wise, you would have something like this where you have different factions of the Taino, but their paintings, their accessories that you're using are going to be different, and each one has to do with the political, military, or religious side of things. And of course, I mentioned it earlier, but there's also like the gods that are part of their culture as well. And in this case, they help, but they also hurt in some ways or another. And of course, the enemy system with the conquistadors, as you draw them, they just come up on the island. But of course, that affects the way you're going to be playing the game on your religious, political, and military tracks. And of course, the different things that you do in this game, you've got the resources as the cassava and the gold. Of course, if you draw from gold, then you may get rocks. There's of course the Taino, the conquistadors that you place, and this is one of the enemies, of course, because as they're introduced in the second game. But there's the Caribe on the other side as well, which are the native enemies before the Spanish arrival. And it is a fantastic game that obviously I've been really excited to be a part of, and I'm any way you can support. If you can't back it or pre-order it, you just share it. That can help a lot as well. So thank you for everybody on the support on this one.
Absolutely.
You know, Julio, I have an idea. You should add the coquille icon as a relaxation or annoying icon.
Yeah. The coquille is a frog that literally goes coquille,
and the symbol of the island.
Well, it's funny that you say that. I mean, you already took it out, but
I'll put it back on.
I had maybe they're not here. They're a different one, but again, the endemic tokens that I talked about, the coquille was one of them, and it was actually the tiebreaker. between all the endemic tokens, because obviously the Coquille being kind of the one that most stands out in the island, and
Yes.
you know, and
Forever.
exactly. So that's a little, again, a little thing that's incorporated into mechanisms of the game, and you don't really have to talk a lot about it. But why is this little frog more important than all the others?
And then people are researching, what is this cookie about?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure it'll make it into some of the artwork. I'm sure. So, excellent. Well, again, thank you for joining us, Julio. Great design. It looks like it's going to be a blast to play. And I'm excited to learn more about Mi Esposa's history.
Yeah,
So,
that's awesome.
Perfect.
Thank you all for the opportunity. Really appreciate it. And I wish you all the best on your program as well.
All right.
Thank
One
you.
last question from Kabuki, because it's a great one. Was the game designed before the Zenobia Awards existed? Just wondering. No.
No, it was not. Again, I've designed a lot of games, so it definitely is something that I'm really fast at designing. But this one, it took me about 4 months. Once the Zenobia Award started, it was they gave you a good time to work on them. But the most of the time that took me on this one was the historical research surrounding it, of course, because I wanted to do it right. And I have ideas once I decided I was going to do it, about how the game was going to be and all that. But as I studied the historical part of it, even more ideas came that were more linked into what the game ended up being.
Perfect.
Awesome.
All right. Well, again, thank you very much. I'll go in and tag those in, and a pleasure having you on the show. And Stuka Joe says, best of success.
Thank you. Appreciate you all.
All right. I'm going to end her now. We'll wind down here a second.